Each episode, we take apart the claims, moving through advertising, media, AI, e-commerce, and business. The numbers, the sources, the incentives, and the parts everyone else skipped. Because the first version of a story is usually the easiest to share. It is not always the safest one to trust. It requires diligence. This is Deeper Diligence, a podcast from Daypart.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Deeper Diligence. We've got Eric Tilbury here today. Eric, very pleased to have you. Mini reunion of the Ad Nauseam podcast. Rest in peace. It was good while it lasted, but yeah, I appreciate you being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, do you want to do a quick intro for all the folks that haven't seen your glorious meme post on LinkedIn and Twitter?
Yeah. If you haven't run into me on Twitter or LinkedIn, I'm the Vice President of Programmatic and Solutions Engineering at Inuvo. And really what we specialize in is the anti of this topic is really just ID-free model building and really not needing to rely on any type of PII or personal identifier when it comes to making a decision. We very much so believe in building ad tech that isn't creepy, but also effective, right? So using strong signals with content and going and saying, how do we make this decision? How do we match this impression opportunity to a specific audience generated by the client, built by the client that they're comfortable with? That's what we're always solving for on a daily basis. And that kind of goes hand in, like it clashes with classic user-based attribution.
Okay, I think we lost about 3/4 of the audience. I get what you're saying. It makes a ton of sense. But let's take it a step back, right? And start with kind of the basics here, because this episode really is all about the hope with this episode is that you can walk away having a basic to moderate understanding of attribution and the upsides and downsides of different approaches, right? And so what is attribution from a philosophical sort of sense? Put on your Kuiper guard hat and the existentialism of attribution, as it were.
Yeah, the most basic definition of it is you go and make a decision on a user ID that is available in a bid request, right? Or any type of an impression opportunity. That ID is there. You serve that impression. Then that user ID goes about its journey on the web or through apps or whatever. And then that user ID goes and purchases on the site. The site goes and looks and says what user ID fired this conversion, what ad was shown to that ID. Oh, this ad, this provider gets credit, right? You could do that
Right.
through the classic, that is a view through type of setup, right?
Mm.
There's click through setup where you serve an ad, instantly click, Google search, right? For example, that user clicks, that link or that
Yeah,
path
and then,
is, oh, go ahead.
sorry, no, I was agreeing with you. Fundamentally, though, it's like somebody saw or interacted with an ad and then did a thing. Basically, what you're describing, I think, is how it works now, right? For most platforms, most of the time, it's like user ID based or click based or whatever. Now, like, walk through, our audience isn't necessarily ad tech folks, right? So, like, view through conversion, click through conversion, what does that actually mean?
Yeah. So view through conversion just says, hey, I showed this user an ad, right? They didn't necessarily click then. And then later on, they went and fired that action that I'm tracking as a conversion on site. That would be a view through conversion. And there's a lot of ways to skin that cat in terms of look back windows and all of that good stuff. And every platform has their different ways of doing it. But then you have the classic click through type of conversion, right? Where a user, like, think of Google search for everyone that doesn't know ad tech as well on here. That user clicks on that link, they go and purchase through that link. That is a click-through conversion. They attributed it straight to there, and you track it in your Google Analytics.
Yeah, now what you were describing beforehand, that's kind of like the way that it's generally done now with kind of like a pixel or like a pixel based or a JavaScript tag that somebody puts on their website. So walk us through that one more time, because I loved what you were saying. I just wanted to make sure that we were setting the stage properly for folks that are not inside of ad tech or maybe even advertising.
Yeah, so like the classic like baseline setup, like the most basic setup that you would have is you have a client that comes in, they say, I have these specific goals. You go and pixel their site, right, with your DSP or whatever you're working on, your buying platform's pixel, right? You go place that pixel on the site. That pixel can now see all of the user IDs that are firing on that site. As the conversions are coming in, it's tracking what IDs are firing those conversions. So as you're going and serving ads, every single user is getting tracked. And really, it's pretty basic. Those users contain trackers. They go and purchase on the site. They match that tracker up to the pixel and say, okay, what user ID fired this? What ad carries that tracker? That system gets credit, right? And then as you go and make decisions in advertising, you go, where am I getting that conversion signal from? I'm going to throw all my money in that. That's where this podcast comes in. Right?
Well, that's the happy journey for sure, but that's not the only way of doing that attribution. So what are some of the other ways that people could think about attribution? Because that's really elegant, but it sounds fragile. And as we know, with privacy legislation and different platform terms of service and everything else, it's become increasingly more fragile. But what are the other ways, before we kind of get into the wonkery part of this, what are the other ways that people actually think about attributing an ad or spend or a platform or whatever to an actual outcome, like a purchase or a lead or something like that?
Yeah, there's a lot of them. There's affiliate type of links, right? Where they're going and they're working with affiliate type of marketers. Those marketers have links that are on their websites. Those users click. I think someone just got in trouble for that recently, right? Where they were.
Yeah, Ben Edelman was our last guest on the podcast, and he was the one that broke that, actually.
Oh, there
So
you
he
go.
was the one that helped Bloomberg out with the research.
And with that specific example, it's something in theory where you're like, okay, a user reads this article. I have a sponsored link on there. That user clicks through that link. They get credit. This is great, right? Like it's working. There's just a lot of ways that can break. There's that link that the advertisers use to say, okay, where's my advertising actually working for me? They rely on that a ton. And that's like literally from the biggest advertisers down to the smallest, go and look at that. That affiliate type of setup is very common. You have different platforms like your social platforms where what I was talking about with the click-through type of conversions where, the users click on there. There's a tracking URL that comes from that link. You get credit for that when that conversion comes in. And I'm sure as we go more into this podcast, we'll dive into that more. But then there's also the good side of it where those are like easy types of setups. Hey, I have a very easy way to say this is where my attribution is coming from. In a perfect world, yeah, like a lot of that would make sense. But unfortunately, we don't live in a perfect world, right?
Not yet.
I'll chime in
yet.
here for a second. I just want to paint the picture because some people that might be listening might not realize the importance at the end of the day. If attribution actually disappeared tomorrow, what would break?
Everything.
Yeah, everything.
Everything except billboards. Billboards for life.
What I heavily believe in terms of attributing performance to an advertising campaign, anything that is attributed in a platform to me is a directional type of optimization of saying, hey, I know the limitations of what it can track, what it can track. I am doing a lot of supply path optimization to make sure that I'm targeting the humans, so on and so forth, so I could trust it. But then you start talking about, okay, when I start diving into environments that the IDs are completely blocked that can track that, like an iOS, a classic Safari type of example. If you go look in your settings in Safari, by default right now, it blocks third-party trackers, right? So look down at anyone that's using a phone, the majority of them have an iPhone. So why would you not want to serve on Safari, right? So I take a more mathematical approach of incrementality testing, which takes longer, right? But it's more effective in the long run.
Can you high level explain those, like geolift studies, that sort of thing? We've been talking about the deterministic, right?
Yeah.
Or quote unquote, supposedly deterministic ways of attributing, where it's one ad, one user, like that's the happy journey with that. Like we know exactly what happened, where it's functionally like the advertising equivalent of like a sales CRM, essentially, right? Like I know this salesperson talked to that person and then they bought, so I can attribute the sale to that salesperson, right? And there's other stuff too, like server to server, where it like, oh, you give me an email on both sides and it matches up the email, like that sort of stuff. Like it exists, right? It can be cookie powered, it can be fingerprinting powered. Like these terms all like obviously blend a lot. But then what you're hitting at though is this like probabilistic side of it, right? Where you're looking kind of more like, I'll let you explain, but it's kind of more like business outcomes and aggregated general, like advertising sort of served here during this time. And I can use math, or people that are smarter than me can use math to like basically connect the dots in like a way that's like very convincing. Is that like a fair way of saying it? How would you?
So first and foremost, media mix modeling is not new. It's not new at all, right? It is an old
It's probably like the
technique.
60s, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, it's how they measured linear TV back in the day, right? Like that, it's not a new technique. It's a very old technique, but the knock on it was that it took a long time to run and it was expensive, right? Like you needed mathematicians and data scientists and all that, and that's not cheap. We live in the world of AI now where like that stuff,
yeah.
yeah, to cavemen like us, that stuff is more accessible, right?
Mhm.
So what it's trying to do is you give it your spend in all your different channels or how you're trying to look at your different microscopes. And you're saying, how well does this spend correlate or explain my business outcomes that I'm getting on the other side? If I spend in this channel, what is going on with my business outcome as I up my spend, as I lower my spend, right? As I take away this geo, as I add these geos, what is going on with my business KPI? And then I'm oversimplifying it, right? But at the most basic definition, that's what it's doing. It's going and creating a model, and it's saying, using math, how can I explain, how does my ad spend explain what's going on with my actual business KPI? And that is a probabilistic approach. But what I have seen, and not to toot my own horn, but I run millions of dollars of ad spend all the time.
And do you get to keep all those millions?
I wish. But I have seen the approach, or a mathematical probabilistic approach, be much more accurate than a deterministic ID match, where you start to, like, we could just go into it. You start to favor the channels that have that strongest match, right? How close do you get to the conversion? Which for the most part, if I had to give a very, very quick definition of what would be the closest, would be like branded search and retargeting. And those get a lot of budget because those convert. Those are the easiest to match back IDs. Those get a lot of credit, right? So a lot of budget gets put there.
Chad, what do you like, generally speaking? You're the pulse of the people in this world. Generally speaking, what would you say most people are using? What and why are they using it? Do you have a sense for that? Like whenever attribution comes up in your meme lord world, basically.
It's hard to tell like what people are using specifically because I feel like it kind of just changes per fiscal year. I mean, every once in a while you hear something about either a Twitter or LinkedIn post saying attribution's dead. They always declare it, and it turns into more of a genre than like an actual event. But it's always declared by someone who's trying to sell a replacement. It just feels like obviously there's been a lot of changes where Google depreciates like a lot of models in their own black box and then onto a platform of media that they sell. But then somehow Apple gets blamed for a lot of that. But it's just hard to tell because everyone's moving the goalposts and just moving the field in tandem with it too. So yeah.
And there's a huge disconnect, right, between the advertising crowd and the ad tech crowd, which is weird because in theory should be like extremely close industries, but they don't talk to each other at all. So from the advertising perspective, though, most people are probably using pixels, maybe some conversion API, server to server sort of setup. Maybe they're playing with lift studies in it, but that's not the primary thing. Or I don't know. Maybe my vibe is totally off here. You tell us.
I know the vibe's pretty right. Like I want to say, like just with the 6 years that I've ran the whole meme page thing, like it feels like there's multiple tribes in the land of advertising where you have the agency people, you have the ad tech people, you have the publisher side, you have the ad sales people. And even like with ad sales, it varies if they're part of ad sales for vendors or ad sales for publishers. And like even then there's this split. Yeah, there's a lot of variance in that whole community, to be honest.
Yeah, it's not the homogenous blob you think it is. Okay. And so I think we're kind of hitting on like all the same thing here, right? Which is in theory, all this stuff, they help you figure out where to put your money so you can spend it most efficiently and get the best ROI, right? Or in advertiser speak, ROAS, which is basically ROI, or return on ad spend, which is usually put out there as a multiple. A client might have a goal of, hey, every $1 in ads that I need to spend, I need to make $2.50 or something like that. Just random numbers. But okay, if everybody talks about attribution being dead, like Chad said, and you're talking about all these problems with it, and everybody's coming up with new solutions, Why does it feel like we're stuck? How do we keep living through this Groundhog Day, one?
I know
And two,
why.
why are these things breaking? Is it like nefarious purposes, or is it just the technology is like inherently unstable for some reason, or is it both? Can you give us a lay of the land of the
It's
failure modes here, Eric?
Yeah, there's a disconnect of what people say at the top versus what people actually do when it comes to buying and measuring their day to
An
day
ad tech
performance.
vendor lying? What? I've
Yeah.
never experienced this before in my life.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, keep going.
Everyone's like, okay, we need to get rid of the fraud. We need to be more accurate with the way that we measure ads and all of this. And people are saying that at the top. But at the bottom, the people that are judged on a daily basis of what are you doing to make my campaigns better? And it comes down to the easy button. Using attribution is much easier, even with AI and mathematical analysis on how well your ad spend is correlating to the business KPI is much harder, and it's much harder to explain, right? If you don't know how to talk about a statistical analysis in any way, shape, or form, like you're just going to default to saying, "Oh yeah, my CPA was this week. It was this week." That kind of trend is much easier for the average person to talk about and bring to a meeting, right? So
Right.
yeah, like
Yeah.
the attribution part, it all comes down to the easy button. It's much easier to make decisions based off the attribution and have the data to back it up.
Yeah, and a lot of the people listening to our show is investors, CFOs, board members, legal counsel, that sort of stuff. They're not masters of ad tech, so of course they want the easy explanation, right?
Yeah.
But like maybe walk them through why they shouldn't accept the easy explanation and like some examples of how these things get distorted in this way that's like maybe not fraud, but is way overly optimistic to make the actual like media buyer who's under a lot of pressure look better, or the agency or marketer. Maybe try and like bridge that gap a little bit.
Say you go full force into saying, I'm going to go for attribution. Your numbers for a while will look good, right? You start going and picking off the low hanging fruit because you're going after attribution, right?
Hmm.
And the reason why it's important for the owners of businesses to know that this is not really the way to do it is everyone starts to see this. They're
Hmm.
serving ads, they're seeing good results, but then they start to plateau, right? Because all of the low hanging fruit is gone. So you have to go up the tree. You have to figure out, how do I get more users in? And to get more new, actual net new in, you have to dive into channels that are harder to measure. And it's not just the easy button anymore. And that's a lot of times that's where agencies and kind of the CMO position becomes a revolving door, because they're so wired to be like, hey, I need to chase this attribution. We need to get the lowest CPA possible. We need to be as
Hmm.
efficient as possible with our ad spend. But they're not going and checking like, hey, am I spending too much in this channel? And by spending in this channel, am I taking away from a channel that's actually adding value, right? And that's where
Hmm.
user-based attribution won't tell you that. A lot of the very common optimization would be like, and I'm simplifying this. I'm very much so simplifying this for the
Sure.
owners. Your branded search has an awesome ROAS associated to it. Your non-branded search looks like it's 10 times higher. But you
Hmm.
turn off your non-branded search, where's all your new users going to come from, right?
Right.
That nuance gets missed when you're just
Hmm.
going down that attribution road.
There's an interesting thing here, right? And so I think this kind of gets into the, I don't want to get too deep into the technical jargon filled Dante's Inferno that is ad tech supply
Yeah.
chain, but like high level, right? Basically, the reason that the user ID stuff doesn't work perfectly is one, like I've got three, four, five devices that could be attributed to an ad sitting around me right now, right? So if I look at something on my phone and then I buy it on my laptop, like you're crossing like devices, right? There's problems crossing environments. So like even going from like a mobile app to a like a website or something like that, or a mobile app to another mobile app is a huge deal to connect the dots. A lot of this comes back to privacy, though, because if you use an enterprise buying platform like Trade Desk or something, you can actually go in and inspect the log files, like each and every impression and like all of that. And then you can look at like the logic of how it joined it. That is so atypical for like the vast majority of ad buying in the world. Google doesn't give you that, Meta doesn't give you that, and they actually kind of have good reason for not doing that because this stuff is basically spyware to some degree. Like you can
Yep.
track somebody around, and if they had a stable ID, you can say, oh, this is what this person buys. These are the apps they have on their phone. This is where they go around, that sort of thing. It's fascinating. So there's like very real privacy issues. And obviously, I think companies have done not enough, but they've taken steps towards trying to make it safer for the end user, who's like the biggest stakeholder here, even though people don't often think about that. But you have this issue now of lots of incomplete pieces of information. And that's why largely this stuff can be so inaccurate.
What you just explained is hard. It's not like it's an easy thing to do, right?
It's like the open source intelligence triangulation at best, right? They're like, I've got 5 pieces of information and I'm going to try and join these 500 different things together based on these 5 pieces of information. And oh, by the way, everybody else in their neighborhood has very similar 5 pieces of information.
Exactly. So that's very hard to do, but ad tech
Oh, and
knows
by the
that.
way, the information switches all the time. Your IP address on your phone switches 20 times a day. So, yeah, you're
Yeah.
trying to not only map that, but you're trying to map the continuity of it.
Think of it like this too. When you start talking about privacy and the due diligence of like, how do I protect a user's privacy in this? The way that you protect the user the most isn't necessarily the way that's going to look good for you and your numbers in terms of attribution, which gets you paid, right? So that's where
Right.
you start to see corners cut on privacy and of just like being like, I'm going to just take credit for every ID, right?
Right. And functionally, what I'm hearing, and you tell me if I'm right, is we kind of have a black box here where it's basically I have these sparse pieces of ephemeral information going in
Yeah.
and out. And that's because of privacy. On the one side, you've got people that want functionally less privacy, no matter what they say. And
Yeah.
then on the other side, you want people who very much so want their privacy.
Yeah.
And then where you end up in the middle is basically because it's a black box, the people on the one side that have a huge incentive to say this is working great construct all sorts of narratives. And they might not be outright lies, but a lot of times it's just overly optimistic, perhaps. Like that's
Exactly.
is the kindest way of saying that. And so walk us through a little bit more of the overly optimistic to what attribution full on fraud kind of looks like.
They could be the same thing, right? Where you'll have a
Yeah.
company that has access to where they can bridge IDs. They call it ID bridging, where it takes it
Yeah.
from one platform, puts it in another, and says, probabilistically, I think this ID matches this ID.
Mhm.
And if they do it in a privacy forward way, and they're just trying to say, hey, how do we best give the signal to the advertiser to optimize? I hate it, but I get it. You're just trying to give people an option to go and optimize. But then you'll get the just straight fraud out there that's just dropping IDs there. Like every and any ID that they can scrape that they got illegally.
And you like can't stop that as the
You
advertiser
can't stop
either,
it.
right? Yeah.
And there's no way. It is so hard for you to go and check and say, did they get this legally? There's no way that you are going to go and check that. So there's just so much that can go wrong.
I want to be
Yeah.
clear. I do check that, but yes.
Yeah. Your average lawyer office or something like that.
Your
right?
average neurotypical person is not running around the internet looking for ID
Yeah.
bridging. Yes,
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do
Yeah.
that in between train spotting. I get it.
Yeah, even something as simple as that of, hey, I'm just trying to give people a good signal for optimization. They could go and do their stuff on top of it to make sure everything's working versus, hey, I'm trying to throw as much crap in here as possible so people spend on my stuff and I get paid the most.
And that's basically the incentive up and down the line. And one of the things you've said a few times, but I think it's worth really calling out, optimization. Because optimization encompasses every single decision for what piece of ad creative you get budget, how you target your ads, what platforms you spend on, the mixture of how you spend on the platforms. It's the second order of effect of attribution, and it rules everything. And that's why this attribution stuff is actually so important. It's not just numbers in a dashboard. This thing moves hundreds of billions of dollars every year.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a practical day-to-day example. Working with specific clients where they come in, they're like, I just need the lowest CPA possible. And I try and sleep well at night. So I'm always like, I'm going to do the best by the end client, no matter what. And then they go and they have all these different ad tech vendors on the plan. Everyone's competing for the lowest CPA possible via the attribution setup. And I'm going and serving on the New York Times, like BBC, ESPN, sites that people that want to be on, whether that be in an ID or an ID free environment. And then you have my competitors that are going and serving on utility flashlights, apps.
The truth about Epstein.com.info,
Yeah.
like that sort of thing.
Yeah, like just straight fraudulent. But because they're chasing an ID that they just retargeted off the site, right? Even if a human never saw an ad, they're getting attribution and they're getting more budget. Like,
Right.
A, how is that fair for me? And how are you spending the best advertising dollars?
And that's kind of this zone of why there's basically an incentive to game the attribution. So forget
Yes.
about outright fraud. People in this industry, it seems like, tend to bury their head in the sand. They're like, it looks good. I'm not going to ask too many questions because I don't want those answers. Chad, would you say that's a fair way of how some platforms and folks go about it? You're the voice of the people again, so I want to make sure you get the people's voice heard.
I mean, I feel like with a lot of platforms, like things get obfuscated because a lot of people operate with ambiguity to a certain degree and it benefits them. So everything's how do we pose a problem and we can offer a solution to, essentially.
Yeah, and just to expand on it a little bit, like you end up with these like hilarious situations where I advertise on 5 ad platforms. I made $1 million in revenue, but if I added them all together, it would say that I made $20 million or
Yeah, like the
something
math
like
just
that.
doesn't math.
What does like actual fraud look like though in this? So ID bridging is, I think it's considered one of those like gray area things,
Very gray.
right? Very gray, yeah. But what is so like FIA though? That was like outright fraud. They were opening Windows and Safari or something like that, like affiliate fraud in general, or these other more like obviously nefarious sorts of like attribution games that people play. Do you know a lot about that, Eric, or no?
So I've always said the difference between a $1 million ad tech company or advertising company and $1 billion advertising or ad tech company is a tracking URL. That is like the biggest thing. So if you can game that somehow of saying, okay, I'm going to either force users to do a certain action that would have converted anyways, and I'm going to just sit at the bottom of the funnel and all of that credit's going to go to me and therefore I'm going to make more dollars. To me, that's just straight fraud. Right?
You mean like mobile games that you have to click to exit the ad experience, that sort of thing?
Yeah, exactly. And they don't even close. So it's a video and you're trying to close it and it just plays. And
Then
that
just
was
opens
just
the
a
Google Play
view-based.
Store or
Yeah.
opens the App Store or whatever. But no, that's click-based, right? Like,
Yeah.
because it made you open the store, even though
Yeah,
you didn't want to.
Exactly. And if you're showing a user that was retargeted, right, that user was probably going to convert anyways. You have a higher chance of that than if you just served a straight prospected ad where you did the right thing of I'm going to find net new. You have far less of a chance of that user converting than a user that was on site showing interest, right? Maybe they abandoned cart, whatever. To me, that is straight fraud. To some, that could be a gray area, but that to me is just straight up fraud.
Now, playing devil's advocate here a little bit, retargeting does work to some degree. Like, it will help nudge somebody over the line to actually make a sale. So there's a legitimate use case for it, right? But it just seems like the legitimate use case gets taken out back and beaten to death over and over. So let's be explicit. Like, retargeting can drive incremental sales in theory,
100%.
but often not the case.
Yeah.
Is that kind of what you're getting at?
The problem itself isn't with retargeting. It's the signal that you get from retargeting that you go way too far into and say, I need to put all of my budget here. So if you looked at it mathematically, then you look at your retargeting channels or your re-engagement type of channels, and your models would tell you, hey, you're over investing here. And by spending here, your iROAS is actually going down, your incremental ROAS.
So the return, the ROI on net new customers, basically.
Exactly, is going down because you have overserved that audience, right? Where you should be spending dollars in a channel that should be fueling that retargeting pool, because you want to fuel that. Retargeting is an awesome tactic, but yeah, everything has diminishing returns at some point.
Yeah, so let's take the extreme happy and the extreme fraud example. So like extreme happy example of like retargeting working, right? It's basically maybe I go see a billboard and I look it up and I go to the website and I think that's neat. And
Yeah.
then I'm driving, so I'm very responsible and I put my phone away. And then 3 days later, I see a YouTube ad or something like that for the same thing. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I wanted to buy that. I forgot. And then I go buy
Yep.
it. Like, that's the happy journey. That's the
Yep.
bull case for retargeting. Now, the reality of it, there's no other way to say it, is oftentimes like you've got 20 hungry ad networks that are like, this person's about to buy this. We have to get either the last click or the last view so
Yep.
that the end advertiser is convinced it was us and they bombard your budget at them. That person now is the most popular person at a party of extremely thirsty people. And like they are
Yeah.
going to do everything in their power to be the last one that touched them on the arm. And it's crazy the gymnastics that these people will go to make that happen. Like
Yeah.
everywhere from outright fraud to just wasting budget and everything else, right? And it seems like it can be legitimate, maybe
Yeah.
often is legitimate, but would you say like the majority of it is not legitimate? How bad would you say it is?
I would say there's some legitimate. There's
We're going to
some
quote you in
legitimacy.
everything we do after
Yeah.
this. Ed tech experts said it's, yeah, no, I'm joking.
There's some legitimacy, yeah, like the happy journey, and that's fine. Your example of just bombarding a user everywhere, like where it starts to get really non-legitimate is where it gets murky of having those IDs that like they're just saying this is the ID here, right?
Mhm.
And that's where it gets really not legitimate. Right?
Right.
And the space that's probably the most prevalent in is probably the app type of space, right? Where they could just take those IDs and they're saying this ID was here. You have no really way of, unless you're on the
Yeah,
case.
I make mistakes. I'm not perfect. I miss things all the time.
Yeah, but it happens
But
everywhere.
I'll say when I'm wrong too. Sometimes I'm wrong. I'll say it if I can be proven otherwise. But brass tacks. I'm a CFO that's worried about my ad spend at my company. I'm an investor. Maybe I'm looking to invest in like an e-com brand that has a lot of ad spend. So obviously this is like huge to get right. Or maybe I'm more of like a public equities hedge fund kind of person and I'm looking to invest in an ad tech company, right? Like what are the like practical things you can do to say this platform is more legit or this one is kind of a little bit more I'd be cautious at best sort of thing?
So I'm actually a believer in testing, right? You never really know unless you test something, right? Like
Sure.
you could say something is trash, but you never really know until you test it. But if I am a hedge fund type of guy or I'm starting a brand, from
Hmm.
day one, I'm figuring out my measurement strategy before I
Hmm.
go about targeting strategy. Because
Right.
measurement can send you in the complete wrong way altogether. So I'm figuring out what is the best way that I can measure what we're trying to do in an effective way, and then have a backup measurement of,
Right.
hey, now that I have this measurement, what do I need to do to make sure that this measurement was correct? And that's where
Right.
all of these different mathematical solutions come into place, where you could say, okay, am I seeing a correlation of when I spend in this, is it actually showing results?
You got to be careful with build it in house though if you can. A
Yeah.
lot of the times you got to even be careful of the vendors that offer this because they built a model. That model is biased in certain ways, like that may or may not be evident. You got to be careful with that. So if I'm like a CFO or and I'm an investor and I have a company that is a heavy advertiser or whatever, it's build an in-house measurement protocol. Is
Yeah.
that a fair way of saying what you're saying?
Yeah.
And then,
100%.
on the other side, for the ad tech side, what everybody talks about is transparency. Is it the more transparent a platform is, the less likely I am to wake up one day and find out like a company I invested in went to zero because it was all fraud or something like that? How do I approach investing in an ad tech company or vetting those from that perspective?
How do we even define transparency?
That could be an entire other podcast.
Right? Realistically, the S chain, like this is like way over everyone's head. It's there for a reason. And if you're going to run ad tech, you should have someone in house that understands ad tech rather than just
Right.
getting burned. Every brand and agency should have a ad tech expert in house that can go
Yeah.
and dive in to say, okay, as I'm buying on the open web or CTV, Am I buying Peacocks directly from NBCU? Is it going directly to them, or am I buying it from some random reseller that I've never heard before that's just dropping that it's this inventory source, right?
For sure.
That type of stuff, you need experts in-house that can do that.
Yeah, and so if I'm an investor, basically, like, maybe don't just take the company's word for it. Actually dive in and see where they're serving ads and who they're serving them
100%.
for, and do that. I gotta get a bell to ring or something. Do the deeper diligence. Oh, before you actually just are like, wow, this company has great margins, right? Which unfortunately in ad tech usually means there's something shady going on because it's such a commoditized industry.
You can pay referees too. Hey, I want to team up with this referee. I want them to go and measure all the impressions that I'm serving, and they tell me how human it is rather than the platform.
No, absolutely. Dr. Fu has the platform, and then there's
Analytics.
obviously the big players like DV. Everybody has strong opinions about them. So looking forward, how do you see this going, and how do you hope that it goes? I'm going to separate those two things just for sanity purposes, just because I generally understand you to be one of the more up and up people in the industry. So how you think it should go probably is a little different than how it's been going.
Where do I see it going? I see it going into the definition of insanity, where they're trying to recreate what they did when IDs and signals were stronger and easier to measure, right? They're doing all of these different initiatives and making all of this different tech on how to recreate the cookie, right? And how do we keep attribution alive by going and reworking IDs, and how do we make IDs stable? That's why you see all of these different O&O platforms becoming stronger and stronger, right? And it's not because, sure, like they're cool to serve on, but outside of their O&O, they're just every other type of like third-party data provider, right?
That's interesting that you bring that up, though, right? Because this is like fundamentally the trench that like Meta and Google have, which is they have user information, they have their own media, they can connect the dots with zero friction. And that's why they're like pretty dominant.
The only problem with that is they also control that third-party ad server, right? So you run other ads.
You're trusting them. Yeah, you're trusting them in another different way. Look, there's no winning here. It's just shades of less bad, right? So that's it, everybody. That tech is hell. Stay far away. No, look, it's a huge industry. It's a huge industry for a reason. Companies need to advertise to grow. When it's done well, it works well, right? Yeah. If you're looking to purchase ads, I would highly recommend hitting up Eric right here, who is on the up and knows what to look for and not get rugged repeatedly. Won't just show you the best results just because it feels nice. I appreciate everybody listening, and hopefully everybody walks away from this with a little bit more better understanding of ad tech and attribution specifically.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Eric, for listeners, you want to drop where they can reach you? Any handles?
Yeah. You know what's funny is I've been on Twitter for so long, and I don't even know my Twitter handle.
Is it like one of those 98 AIM handles? Like XX Eric rules? Like,
Skater boy?
Yeah.
No, it's just Tilbury. You could get the way to spell it from the podcast, _RTB on programmatic, and LinkedIn, just my first and last name, Eric Tilbury.
You're a good follow. You drop lots of interesting stuff and are challenging the status quo in a smart way. So it's always appreciated. Thanks everybody for listening. And hopefully you learned a lot about attribution that you may or may not have ever wanted to know.